As the president and congressional Democrats remain at an apparent impasse over the border wall, the president has his critics for shutting down the government and those who say he must stand up for the national security. CBN's Charlene Aaron spoke with Center for Security Policy President Frank Gaffney about why he believes it's so important for the president to win this battle.
Frank, you believe there is a lot riding on this border wall for our nation?
I do. I don't know how else to describe it, but that I think it's fundamental to the future sovereignty and therefore the very existence of our country, that we're able to prevent people who, in many cases, are unknown and at the very least have to be expected to be in some numbers hostile to us from coming across our border at will and demanding, not only services and accommodation and other benefits, but an opportunity to operate wherever they choose to inside our country. That's a problem, I believe, a public health problem, almost certainly, but also likely a public safety and perhaps even a national security problem.
And do you think the president will tough it out?
He certainly has suggested so far that he thinks this is a fundamental matter of principle, not just political gamesmanship. And I think he's right. He ran for office on the principle that he was going to secure our southern border, build the wall, as he euphemistically described it. And I think that he's as intent on doing that today as he was then, and he should be, because, as I say, there's an awful lot riding on this, and I think the president has a far better grasp of that than do a lot of members of Congress, quite frankly, on both sides of the political aisle.
And what about how this is affecting government workers and the American public?
Well, look, I think that the fact that whatever it is, quarter of the overall number of agencies in the U.S. government and their non-essential personnel have been on furlough as opposed to vacation over the past few days has meant that it's been a fairly minimal burden on them, and they'll likely be reimbursed for what impact on their pay there has been. So I think it's kind of in effect a deferred paid holiday. As to the impact on the public, I think it's been fairly minimal so far, simply because of the period in which it's taken place. It's not to trivialize the problem. It's simply to say, is it important to hold the line and get done what the president has promised to do and I think is manifestly necessary, namely protecting the American people, protecting the country itself from people seeking to do us ill, coming across that southern border as they can now with impunity. And I think the president really has no choice. I hope he will, in fact, hold the line and that Congress will ultimately realize that this is a necessary step.
Do you think the government shutdown will continue with the new Congress if it isn't resolved before?
I tend to think it's going to be resolved before. I think there's an awful lot of incentive to getting people back to work and the new year starting off on the right foot and all that. But look, if at the end of the day, the decision can't be made by the outgoing Republican-led Congress, I think it's going to have to be made by the Congress that will have one house controlled by Republicans and the other by Democrats.
And Frank, finally, what's at stake for the president politically in all of this?
Well, the president, I hope, is looking at this not as a political matter. There's a lot of talk about that, and his base being very concerned about him living up to his promises and so on, and I'm sure that that's operating at some level. But the truth of the matter is the president has to deal with this as the commander-in-chief, as the man who ultimately is responsible for the security of the United States and its people. And that is a job that I think he is going to pursue without regard for the politics. But an intent of doing the right thing. And in this case, it's unmistakably clear. The right thing is securing that border. It doesn't mean a physical barrier all across the 2,000 miles of territory that it needs to be secured. It does mean that in the places where a wall is needed, we build one, and we build it as quickly as we possibly can.
Frank Gaffney with the Center for Security Policy, thank you so much for your insights and for your time.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.